I wanted to talk a little bit today about a couple of different approaches to create React applications. So we're going to talk about Create React App, and we're going to talk about um, Gatsby. So each of these have a little bit of a different way of kind of working and creating a new project. But let's start out with Create React App. So we're going to do npx create React App. Excuse my typing abilities here. So npx create React App, and then the name of the project that we want to create. So create React App, new React App, and we're using npx. That essentially, like, npm pulls in like the latest and executes it locally. You don't have to install it globally. Like, npx is a super cool command. I wish there was one for Yarn. There is not. But while this installs, essentially what it's doing is creating a project with scaffolding with React and React DOM and React scripts. So, like, if you watch any of the videos that I did on like Webpack and React in general, and being able to you know, inject React into an HTML document, all of this is taken care of for you in these projects. And React scripts that you see being installed here essentially give you really well thought out commands. And so what we see here is the project, right? So we have our new React app. And if we take a look at our package JSON, it's done a lot of work for us. Now, this is such a small package compared to what previous Create React apps would create. So we've got the latest React, React DOM, and React scripts. React scripts allows us to execute like a start script, a build script, a test script, and eject. You're probably never going to want to use eject if you're starting a project this way. Eject basically takes all of these scripts, the ESLint config, the Webpack config, Babel config, all of that stuff, and ejects it out so that you can customize it. But there's almost no reason to do that. These are things that you probably don't need to touch. The people behind this kind of know what they're doing. So they've set all this stuff up for you. So if we go yarn start, couldn't find package JSON. Oh, yeah. We still have to cd into the project. What was it? New React app, yeah. So we're going to go yarn start, and stuff's going to happen. So it goes ahead and opens a window up while it's starting its development server. And it's going to essentially, like, start up a development server, compile the app, and what you get is your full-blown React app. So let's take a look at what that project scaffolding looks like. What you have here is your index, which this should look familiar. Every React project is going to start out with a React DOM render, and we're going to hand it the application, and it's getting the element ID by root. So basically, it hands you a very simple, like, ready to use project out the gate. Now, if you wanted to make changes to this, it's set up to hot reload. Why did I close that? I want to show you hot reloading. Okay. So yeah, it's set to hot reload. So go to our app. No. Give that a save. And now it's no.js. Okay. So really simple way to kind of start and get a project scaffolded and like ready to go with Create React App. So if you want to experiment with React, I highly recommend that. It bypasses all of the weird like Babel and Webpack config and all of that kind of stuff. The next thing that we're gonna go ahead and do is Gatsby. And Gatsby gives us a bit more of a sophisticated project because it's Gatsby and it does server-side rendering, and well, it leverages server-side rendering. There's a difference between what it does in an actually server-side rendered app, which we don't really need to get into. But essentially, if you have Gatsby installed, which is just like npm install global Gatsby, you can do that. We'll do npx here as well. npx Gatsby new, and we will call it new Gatsby. So that's going to take a minute to install. So this is scaffolding a project very similar to what we had scaffolded out for the Create React app. However, since Gatsby leverages some pretty heavy core server-side rendering APIs in order to statically generate some pages, it has to do quite a bit more configuration. And so they've basically put together what's called a starter, which is a deeper kind of project structure. So we want the new Gatsby, right? Let's take a look at what this gives us. So what we have here is, and I always like to look at the package JSON, something very different than Create React Apps. You can see right off the bat this is a much larger project. So if we look at our dependencies, we've got all these plugins, we've got a transformer, but we still have React DOM and React at the latest versions. They also have their own prettier config, which I disagree with in a lot of places. So our standards package addresses that and takes over. And so I'll show you how to install that in just a minute. At the core of every Gatsby project is this Gatsby Config.js. And so this has the site's title, a description, author information, but plugins. So Gatsby has a plugin architecture, and essentially everything that you want to do from data sources to kind of transforming images and that sort of stuff will all happen here in the plugins. So there's a lot of great detailed information on that in their documentation, which in this particular area is really good documentation. But when you open up the source folder, it's very different than just like an app.js. They have kind of an opinionated structure here, and I tend to like it. There are only a couple of disagreements that I have with it. But one of their rules is in source pages, these are all routes. So we have our 404, we have our index, which is going to be our main page here. And these are your routes. There are other ways to create routes, which we'll get into in a later video addressing some of this stuff. But basically, you know, if you want slash projects or slash posts or whatever, you create a post.js and you start building that here. So let's give this a yarn start. And it is not a coincidence that all of these projects use Yarn. It's because it's the best. Let's go ahead and get a new Chrome window open here. And Gatsby starts up on localhost 8000, and this is what it gives you. Excuse me. So it gives you this little starter. It shows you some of the routing that it can do using its link component. There's some neat stuff happening behind the scenes with that particular component. Basically, just this kind of scaffolded out little project. And you can see in this starter, they have their layout component, which is something that is useful in a lot of cases. They show you how to do a little bit of SEO. There's this image component that shows you how to use their static query component. So there's a lot of lessons to be taken away from this just kind of starter project. And building off of this is usually a pretty good idea because a lot of their initial configuration with their plugins right out of the gate, React Helmet is an important one for SEO. So they make a lot of good decisions for you out of the gate. Now, we may internally develop our own starter or theme at some point, but for now, most of what we're building will probably be based off of this. Now, I mentioned earlier I have some disagreements with their choices in some of their standards and some of their linting configurations. So what you want to do at the beginning of all of these projects is npx tag standards. And when you run that, it's going to go out, it's going to get the standards package, latest version, which is great. It's going to ask you this question. I'm going to move myself. I feel moved. This will permanently modify the project. Yeah, you want to permanently modify the project. So this is going to go ahead and take care of your ESLint configs, all of that stuff, prettier configs, and pre-commit hooks, which means when you need to make a commit and push that, before it allows you to make that commit, it makes sure that everything meets these standards. And it'll throw warnings for most things, and those are pretty minor, but it will also throw errors if you're breaking rules that really ought not be broken. So this is just like a quick introduction to if you're actually going to be working in React and working with Gatsby, this is much more likely to be the way you're going to do it. You're not going to be setting up your own Babel config. You're not going to be setting up your own Webpack. You're going to work in these kind of broader problem-solved, batteries included kind of development frameworks that people have worked really hard to make some good decisions with. So hopefully this is a good kind of introduction and starter. We will be talking again in the future.